Charles, segment 5, last segment of last, what she leaves us. 1990, Margaret Thatcher's final appearance in the House of Commons as Prime Minister after 11 years. They made her the longest-serving Prime Minister since Lord Liverpool. And that's a test of how long ago it was because nobody remembers Lord Liverpool. So question is she worn out? Is she weary? Is she fatigued? Take a look.
I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful. The Prime Minister is aware that I detest every single one of her domestic policies and have never hid that.
And I think that the honourable gentleman knows that I have the same contempt for his socialist policies as the people of East Europe who have experienced it have it for theirs. I think I must have hit the right nail on the head when I pointed out that the logic of those policies are they'd rather have the poor poorer. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap was that. Down here. That. Not that.
She is superb, isn't she?
But that. So long as the gap is smaller, so long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way.
She'd won the Falklands War. She played a central role in the West's victory in the Cold War. She led the Conservative Party to 3 victories in general elections. Behind Germany, Italy, and France in living standards when she took office, Britain is essentially pulled even by the time she leaves office, and she's set policies in place that permit Britain to overtake all 3 in the following decade. Her own colleagues in the Conservative Party turfed her out. Why?
Well, my own interpretation of it is that it was a top-down revolt rather than a bottom-up revolt. And I think it was really because her colleagues were fed up with her being in charge of them for so long, and she was not always polite to them. And also a lot of them...
She did not mellow.
No, she didn't mellow, no. And in fact, she probably got more arrogant with the passing of the years. And she also had a profound difference of opinion with them about the European Union, because she believed that the European Union was going to take away British sovereignty and become a United States of Europe of a very dangerous kind. And many of them disagreed. And so they capitalised on her wider unpopularity, which was more to do with a particular tax that she'd introduced and the fact she'd been in for so long, and they led a sort of coup against her. Even in that coup against her, which was a leadership ballot of her members of parliament, she won. She got more votes than her opponent, but not enough to prevent a second ballot, and therefore she was advised that this was unwise to push it any longer. There wasn't enough backing, and she went, and she was probably right to do that. But it was an extraordinary thing because I saw her shortly afterwards, and I said she was going to write her memoirs, which of course she did. And I said, "What are you going to call them?" And she said, "Undefeated." And the reason for that was, of course, that it was absolutely true that she was undefeated. She'd won, as you say, all those elections, and she'd actually won the leadership ballot, which caused her to leave. But it also expressed her character, because she felt she prevailed in the matters in which she wished to prevail.
Charles, her legacy. Mrs. Thatcher wants a United Kingdom ruled from the Palace of Westminster. She defeats the unions. In 1984, she completes 1,000 years of British political development. The House of Commons rules Britain. And now we have an assembly in Scotland, an assembly in Wales that have taken sovereignty away from the House of Commons, and still more to the point, a constant leeching of sovereignty to Brussels. She wanted a Britain that was proud of its own identity. Today we're well into multiculturalism, and with the 20 years of immigration and high birth rates among the Muslim population, there are neighborhoods, particularly in the north, where Sharia law is an alternative to British law. She wants free markets. She wants constant pressure on the welfare state. Today, the Conservative Prime Minister, David Cameron, talks incessantly about social services. He sounds more like Edward Heath than like Margaret Thatcher. She wanted a Britain that was strong as was reasonable based on the size of its economy. And this past spring, Prime Minister David Cameron, a conservative, her successor as Conservative Prime Minister, even as he was calling on NATO to commence operations in Libya, he was shrinking British defense spending and decommissioning the last British aircraft carrier, the Ark Royal, which, by the way, in this morning's news, they put it up for auction and a Hong Kong firm wants to buy the Ark Royal and turn it into a floating shopping mall. What did she leave that lasts?
Well, I would say that she left, first of all, a huge change in economic ideas, so that nobody wants to go back to all the state subsidy, union power, nationalised industries. And this became a global concept that she exported, of which privatisation is the best known. So that is common ground even with the moderate left these days. I mean, they don't really like it, but nobody wants to go back. Secondly, I think she left an idea which, in my opinion, will go on as much as one can ever say in politics forever, all over the world, which is a certain robust idea of freedom, a sort of active idea of freedom. And a sense that if you work hard enough at this, you can prevail. It's true that the immediate legacy, sort of 20 years on, is very contested. And Mrs. Thatcher is a very, very controversial figure, and she never took any prisoners. So there were people who were horrified by what she did and wished to overturn it. And so she's someone who stirs up tremendous emotions. There was an element of damage in that, but it was a price worth paying, I think, for her belief that you must tell the truth. And that the trouble with democratic politics is that illusions tend to prevail because illusions are easier. Now I notice that as we're in an era of deficits and massive debt problems and massive government spending problems, I notice, because I've been working on this for some time, that her reputation is growing very much in the United Kingdom, having been gone quite low at one point, because people see how much she tried to deal with real problems. And what they tend to notice is that current politicians are not dealing so much with real problems. And I detect a similar debate going on in the United States. I think there's a feeling, and you often get people say, not people who necessarily agree with her, but they say, we need a Maggie Thatcher.
So her
she's
example,
a sort of
example itself
yes.
is a substantive achievement.
Yes, I think it's very much...
It gives the rising generation something to hold on to.
Everything to do with Margaret Thatcher is not precisely ideological. It's very much to do with character as well. It's to do with how can somebody, here is this example of this woman all alone, tackle the problems that need tackling. Margaret Thatcher is a titanic figure in the history of Britain, and I think she has already entered myth. And so, as you know, the symbols of monarchy in Britain are the orb and the sceptre, but the symbol of power with Margaret Thatcher is the handbag, and that this thing could come to mean so much. And this thing wielded by her, this symbol of power, tells you a huge amount about the change of the role of women in society, the importance of character, and the importance of a particularly British approach to political rule, which I think will continue to mean a lot for centuries.
Final question. Margaret Thatcher summed up Ronald Reagan's place in history in one sentence. Ronald Reagan won the Cold War without firing a shot. You've produced a book on Margaret Thatcher. Could I ask you to try for one sentence? What should we hold on to about her?
She had the courage of her convictions, and her convictions were proved right by the course of history.
Charles Moore, journalist and biographer of Margaret Thatcher, thank you.
Thank you.
For Uncommon Knowledge, I'm Peter Robinson, and before I say goodbye, I'd like you to know that for access to thousands of historical documents relating to Mrs. Thatcher and her time in government, you can visit the Thatcher Foundation at, easiest web address in the world to remember, Margaret Thatcher, one word, margaretthatcher.org. And now, Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge saying thank you.